Can you have him announce that it's at a different link? It's at a different link. That link got burned. I don't know why.
I'll let the people email me. You ready yet? We're live, Senator.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Guy Gazzoni. I'm the chair of the Senate Budget and Tax Committee. This is a joint hearing with our committee and the Education Subcommittee of the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. And I think at this point, from that committee, I believe would be Senator Kagan, is the vice chair, and I'd like to welcome her and her subcommittee and committee. This hearing is about issues at the Maryland School for the Deaf. I want to read some just sort of technical information. We've already had, unfortunately, some technical problems getting started this afternoon, but I wanted to be clear about what's going on. We have a couple sets of interpreters to make this hearing work, and let me just read this bit of information. The interpreters necessary for this meeting will always need to be visible on the Zoom screen. Kim, who's our staffer, will turn off all of the video feeds of the senators and panelists who are not speaking or signing. There are two sets of interpreters for the entire meeting. Joe Luca and Carrie Marcus will be interpreters. They will switch off from one another and take some breaks. The Maryland School for the Deaf has retained their own interpreters, Becky Frey and Brenda Kelly Frey, or Fry, who will also switch off from one another to take breaks. The videos for the interpreters will be on during the entire meeting. Participants can pin whichever of those videos that they desire to their screen so that they will always be visible. To pin a video in Zoom, hover your mouse over the desired video, click on the ellipses, and an option to pin will appear, and then click that option. We also have retained a closed captioning service. For members who have questions, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. When you are called on, Kim will activate your video. Be sure to speak at a pace that allows the interpreter time to interpret. In the event that participants feel there has been a misinterpretation of the dialogue, we ask that after the meeting, you draft a document and submit that to the committees as a correction of the record. We will post that document on the General Assembly website. So with that, I'm going to start the hearing. And just as a preface, this came to our attention through a Sun article from the beginning of February. I'll read the headline. Former students, their parents, and parents say that the School for the Deaf allowed racist, elitist culture and call for an overhaul. Obviously, that grabbed a lot of attention. Very serious concerns that were expressed. This is an institution of the state. We clearly have a responsibility and oversight, and that is what this hearing is about, learning about what the concerns are from these individuals, hearing from the school itself. I should mention that shortly after this information became public, the superintendent of many years retired outside of what was expected to be his retirement. So we're trying to really get down to what has happened. And most importantly, of course, as always, what we can do to ensure that if there were any concerns that are expressed that clearly were things going on at the school that are improper, that we make sure that that doesn't happen ever again. So with that, I'm going to ask The group of parents and alumni and former employees, they have a panel that's going to begin. And the first person on that list is Katrina Register. And I could ask her to begin her presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina, and I'm an alumni of the class of 2013. And in 2007, I was only 11 years old, and I was dating a classmate. I had a boyfriend, and he shared some nude photos of mine with the whole campus. I was shocked by this behavior, and he shared that through AOL, Instant Messenger, as well as email, which was a system that was used at the time. I started by having bullying occur to me and name calling and public shaming that occurred to me because of this. And the boy who did that didn't receive any disciplinary action, but rather the principal, Marcia Flowers, actually threatened to call the police on me and intimidated me. I was shocked by that, and I actually started having suicidal thoughts because of it. The staff and the administrators did not provide any resources to me, even though they knew that I had a family history of mental health issues. I had an older sister who also attended the Maryland School for the Deaf, and so they were aware of this family history. This actually violated the FERPA law because they talked about my family history. My school counselor did not provide any protection to me, even though I went to her. When I was 12 years old, I met a gentleman who was 23 years old at that time. There was a 9-year difference between the two of us, and we started dating. He started by making a move on me, and we got into a relationship. And this wasn't only with me, he had done this to other women. And the school was aware, and they did not do anything about it. The staff and administrators did not call the police and did not arrest him as they should have, because he was a pedophile and he should have become registered as a sex offender and then became person non grata from the Maryland School for the Deaf. The school knew about all of this and everything that was happening to me and never protected me. And the staff and students continued to bully me all the way until graduation. And my counselor basically told me to just suck it up until I graduated. I have 2 deaf daughters, and I am afraid to send them to the Maryland School for the Deaf because I don't want them to go through what I went through when I was there, because I was so scared. And I want there to be change so that the students and the parents feel like the Maryland School for the Deaf is a safe place again. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presenter, unless there are questions from anyone, is Catherine Griswold.
Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Griswold. I am a parent of an alumni, former director of nursing at Maryland School for the Deaf. I want to thank you for the opportunity to give this group the opportunity to speak to this committee about concerns related to Maryland School for the Deaf. First and foremost, I would like to state that my role as a nurse for over 25 years, I have been a staunch advocate for those who need a voice. I have found in my advocacy work and as a legal nurse consultant that there is always an element of truth to persons' complaints. I have found that when doing investigations and when there are patterns of behaviors and issues such as an MSD, there are merits to the complaints and they warrant further independent investigations. As you know, under laws such as Title IX, there are strict guidelines for documenting and reporting abuse. Child abuse is a required report by healthcare workers, school counselors, and teachers to Child Protective Services. State and federal regulations allow for whistleblowers to report fraud and abuse to independent sources. It is these protections that are missing at Maryland School for the Deaf and would allow concerns to be addressed and investigated in an unbiased manner. For far too long, Maryland School for the Deaf has been isolated and controlled the narrative of what occurs at the school. In order to end the negative culture that exists, it is essential that there is an independent investigation with protections granted to individuals reporting issues. That moving forward, there is greater oversight of the school that protects both students, staff, and all stakeholders of the school. In my experience, there's twofold. One, as the parent of a hard of hearing student who is now an alumni, and as a nurse and the director of nursing. As a parent, what I saw repeatedly was elitism, different treatments of students and families of the school, and a history of giving priority to students of different classes, such as generationally deaf students are given special treatments with sports, awards, classes, grades, teachers, etc. Deaf students who are second generation deaf are next in line of priority. Newly deaf come beneath them, and deaf of hard of hearing are treated very differently and almost like subclass citizens. Athletes are always given preferential treatment, especially when the athletes are white or who come from generationally deaf families. Hard of hearing. I have been told on a number of occasions by Jamie Tucker that my son and other hard of hearing students do not belong anywhere. That hard of hearing students are not deaf enough, and therefore they are not really part of the community at Maryland School for the Deaf. Hearing parents are treated very differently. Parents who did not attend Gallaudet College are treated differently and told that Gallaudet parents are better parents than non-Gallaudet parents. If students are not in sports, they are harassed by students, coaches, and Mr. Tucker. My son was not going to go to Gallaudet, and on many occasions I was told by Mr. Tucker and others at the school that unless he attended Gallaudet, he would never become anything or amount to anything. I have to say that my son has obtained an MBA from the Simon School of Business and is a senior financial analyst at a multi-million-dollar corporation. And I think that's due to my persistence. Issues that I saw as a nurse. As above, the same structural issues I saw again and again and again. The generationally deaf students and families were treated very differently than others. What I saw with some of the racism is, especially with my African-American or Black and brown athletes, when they were injured, as the nurse and director of nursing, I was harassed repeatedly to allow injured players to play sports, even though it went against medical advice. Once certain students were unable to play anymore, they were ignored by coaches and administrator, and I was told repeatedly that they didn't need them anymore, so they didn't need to really attend to them. Sexual assaults did occur while I was attending at Maryland School for the Deaf, both before I was there and after I was there. When I was there, I fought vigorously with administrators to call the police and do the right thing. Tucker would fight with me to not call the police. They did not want outside investigations at the school. While I was there, Mr. Tucker knew the football coaches were giving players energy supplements without any parental consent. This product was not approved for children. This became a contentious issue between Tucker, the administration, and I to stop coaches from giving substances to students that were minors, and it went against medical advice. Because I could not get the school to do the right thing, I went ahead and made a Child Protective Services complaint. When they came and investigated, that's when the coach was finally suspended. The Frederick News Post did pick up on the school, and I was shocked that nothing within the school changed. In the early 2000s, then Governor Ehrlich and the superintendent of school at that time attended a meeting at the school to attend parental concerns. When I arrived at the school, Mr. Tucker was speaking with then Governor Ehrlich and his security team and pointed at myself and other parents who were vocal about issues at the school. Ehrlich's security team walked over to where we were sitting, put his hands on our shoulders and said we were not permitted to speak in the meeting. After the meeting, we were escorted to a small officer with the security, Mr. Tucker and Governor Ehrlich. He was told that we were the disgruntled parents. We asked to speak to him without Tucker in the room, and we were told no, we had 2 minutes. This was the typical way Mr. Tucker used power and intimidation to control the narrative at the school. Ironically, when I worked there, I received an outstanding letter of evaluation from Mr. Tucker saying he gave me that because it was the first year that he had not wound up in a union issue because of the complaints with nurses. Mr. Tucker and a core group of others at the school have a long history of treating students, parents, and employees differently depending on being deaf enough, what school you went to, and other types of isms. I wish to thank you and the member of your committee for your time and your profound understanding that the need for change is now, that improved oversight and an independent method to report issues is necessary for the safety and welfare of all the stakeholders at Maryland School for the Deaf. I thank you very much.
Thank you. How long were you a nurse there?
I worked as an adjunct for, I think, 2 years, and I was the director of nursing for a year. And I left because I was very frustrated with trying to get administration to do the right thing. And as I stood strong, and when I made the CPS complaint, they started retaliating against my son. So I left because my son still had to finish school there, and I didn't want him to be the source of being picked on and harassed because I was trying to be an advocate for my students. You know, I valued the students there, and nobody should be harmed while in a school situation.
Thank you. Just a reminder to everyone. So I think what we've allotted, I believe, was 40 minutes for the entire panel. So I just want to make everybody aware of that and use their time appropriately as they go forward. The next one up is Maria Hourhan.
Why are you doing that?
Yes, hello. I'm Maria Hourhan.
Sorry.
And I'm a former employee as a teacher's assistant at the Maryland School for the Deaf. And I was there in 2012 when I witnessed an incident, a teacher's aide who harmed a Black student who was in the pre-K class. She twisted her hand and arm back, and the girl was screaming. I witnessed this event. I pulled the girl to me and held her. I was shocked about this and didn't know what to do. MSD hadn't trained me in any way to handle this kind of situation or how to report it. At that time, it was nap time. And so I waited for the teacher to show up. And once the teacher did arrive, I notified the teacher about what had happened and talked to the teacher in private about it. And I told the teacher that the teacher's aide hurt the student, and I expected that the teacher would report that to the principal. After that, there was no follow-up, nothing whatsoever. But the staff ended up picking on me and bullying me because of that, and I felt overwhelmed by that. When I did report it to the principal and explained what had happened, I wanted the principal to know that the staff had bullied me and given me a hard time. We came together with the staff and had a meeting, but the meeting was inconclusive. I wasn't able to express everything that had happened and what I was able to witness as far as that teacher's aide harming that girl. The principal was Jennifer. She actually left the meeting quite hurriedly because of some personal reason, and we were never able to complete the meeting. And so I ended up going home, and I couldn't stop thinking about this. I really wanted to get this out in the open and talk about it. And so that night, I text the counselor because I wanted to talk about it. And it was Carlin, was the counselor at the time, and she never responded to my text message. But the principal, Jennifer, did text me, and she asked me if I was okay. And I told her I wanted to express myself. But I wasn't of a clear mind at that time because of everything I had seen at MSD. I was just overwhelmed by all of it. So at that moment, I said, I will shoot. And I didn't actually mean to say that. There was somebody named Dan. He said, if there's a Black person near my daughter, I will shoot them. But you need to understand that my first language is Spanish, and my second language is English, and my third language is American Sign Language. And so I got the text incorrect, and Jennifer should have known that and should have clarified by having a video phone call with me. But rather, she called the police on me, and the police showed up at my house, and they would not provide an interpreter. They did write something down and use a laptop and said, can you read this? It was just one sentence. And they showed me the text message I had sent. And I said, no, I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say Dan would shoot that. But the principal cut off the remainder of the conversation, and they only had that one line I said. So they ended up taking me to the hospital. They didn't even bother listening to my side of the story about what I had witnessed with that teacher's aide harming that student. And so I ended up being in the hospital for a week. I did have a breakdown twice and spent some time in the hospital. Since that time, I've been seeing a therapist. And I received a police report, and I was taken aback because they never got my side of the story. And recently I reapplied to work at the Maryland School for the Deaf because someone encouraged me to go back to working there because they knew that I was good at working with special needs children. But apparently the principal emailed me and told me it was some kind of mistake with the hiring process and I couldn't actually be hired. And so the sad part is that the teacher's aide that I witnessed, MJ, is still working there and she's not safe, the children aren't safe, and the staff is not safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also recognize that Chairman Pinsky, Paul Pinsky of the full committee of Education, Health, and the Environment, I guess was able to get in. So we appreciate you being here and certainly jump in anytime you want, Senator. Next up is Eric Woods, who's a former employee.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Woods, and I'm one of the alumni from the Maryland School for the Deaf. I was a former employee there as well for almost 24 years, actually. And I'm here today to let you know about my concerns about Maryland School for the Deaf and their issues of safety, as well as for the staff and students at the Maryland School for the Deaf. Maryland School for the Deaf has a long history of abuse and neglect and oppression. It's a very hostile environment, specifically during Tucker's time as superintendent. At the time of James Tucker's tenure, I, as a teacher's assistant, worked with special needs children. I also worked in the normal everyday classroom as well. And every time I saw a severe incident happen, I would follow it up with an incident report. And so I saw a lot of different incidents over the years, but I never saw any improvement or change. And so a couple years ago, there was a special needs student who was with me, who I was escorting. And this one was a very serious case. And I was taking care of him and supporting him, and I had for quite some time. And he had been physically abusive to staff, including myself, and other teachers' aides, and I had filled out numerous incident reports about this. And I expected that there would be some action taking, but after 6 or 7 months after that incident, and again, this was pretty severe, thinking about happening in school, he actually hit me and punched me 8 times. And so I decided that I had had it and that had been enough. So I decided to call the Frederick City Police. And I followed up with an actual police report. And the police said that they were coming to the campus, the Maryland School for the Deaf, and they would arrive in about 10 minutes. And I waited for upwards of 30 minutes. I found out from someone else that they arrived at a different building. So finally, I was able to find Kevin Strachan. And he had actually taken the police officers and taken them into a private office. But I was the one who had called the police. And so I wanted to go into that office so that I could be a part of the conversation. And I asked what was going on. And Kevin refused to interpret. He was speaking English to the police officer, and I did not know what was going on. And he twisted the story. I don't know what he was saying, but he refused to interpret for me, and they refused to provide any kind of interpreters. I asked him if he would interpret because this was a serious case, and he refused to. So I decided to text so that I could try to say a few things. And I asked if Kevin would leave the room so that I could make my report about what had happened and I could follow up with the process. So a few weeks later, I actually ended up going to court. And Kevin had told a few witnesses that court had been canceled, and that in fact was not true. And so I decided to call one of the witnesses, and he was able to make it to court. And he actually saved my neck by the fact that he was able to make it to court. And so I can't believe Kevin had the nerve to twist the story and tell lies. That boy's parents came to court and they decided to withdraw the case. And so that's everything that happened with that case. Also, I had reported another issue, I think about 10 or 12 years ago. There was a boy who was 18 years old. He was a pretty smart kid, pretty high functioning, but he was threatening and bullying staff. And that's one of the issues with Maryland School for the Deaf, is they tend to neglect things like that and they don't report it. And he actually threatened to hit me. And I reported that to the Frederick City Police as well. And then I went to court for that, and he got charged for second-degree assault. And my number one priority is the safety at the Maryland School for the Deaf for other people. And so again, this neglect for the students and the staff is really a safety issue. And that goes back to Kevin. He violated a federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, by not providing an interpreter and giving me communication access, especially with such a serious situation. And I followed up that report to the personnel office, to Anna Curran, about that. And after that happened, Kevin picked on me because of that and saying that I had twisted things and lied. And so I ended up talking to the union. And so I talked to the state of Maryland and my union a couple times, and I filed grievances and followed the process for that. And I actually won 2 cases in the state of Maryland through pursuing it through my union and the court procedures with that. After that, he kicked me out of the Maryland School for the Deaf. And the problem is that there are a lot of things that are happening there, but none of it is the truth. And I am concerned about the kids' safety with all of this neglect that's going on there. And there's no active discipline that's happening in any shape or form. And I'm hoping that because of today's hearing, it'll be a time for the change so that things can be better in the future and better for the students and the staff at the Maryland School for the Deaf. Also, a lot of the teachers are afraid because of James Tucker and because of Kevin and how they constantly twist the story of the events that occur on that campus.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for
Right.
now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Rosen.
Hello, my name is Sarah Rosen, and I am a parent of two hard of hearing teenage boys. And there are some serious problems that have occurred at the Maryland School for the Deaf. Talking about OAG and MSDE and the state legislation, they turn a blind eye, even though we have made reports about many violations that have happened within the Maryland state system as far back as 2000. Now, I've sent an attachment, which I hope that you'll review carefully. Is Maryland School for the Deaf a private school or is it a state school? That's the question that I have. And if it is a state school, why is it separate from MSDE? Mary Singfrisch, who is somebody who works for MSDE and specializes in low incidence disabilities, should be knowledgeable about appropriate services for deaf and hard of hearing students. So why isn't she collecting our concerns and reporting them to MSDE? Now, I ended up pulling my boys out of the Maryland School for the Deaf because it's not safe and it's also hostile, and there's a lot of discrimination and retaliation happening by the school administrators and staff. And MSDE has not gotten involved, has not been opening to hearing any of these concerns. And it's not just the concern of mine and mine alone, but many people. And the things that I've seen, there's been many threats within the Maryland School for the Deaf system. And there's no oversight or protection whatsoever. And the OAG is protecting the top administrators of Maryland School for the Deaf and nobody else, meaning the staff and students. And parents have concerns. They want to know how to file grievances, how to come to resolutions. And the Maryland School for the Deaf and the OAG turn a blind eye and do not tell them the procedure. I'd also like to talk about the Maryland law, 8-3A-03. And that was passed on July 1st of 2016 when that was enacted. And it states, duties of the parties, meaning the Maryland School for the Deaf, the school district, and the Maryland State Department of Education. They are to focus on meeting the deaf and hard of hearing children's educational needs. But that's not been the case. They have not worked together to facilitate that. And Maryland School for the Deaf has refused to participate. And MSDE has said that it's out of their control because Maryland School for the Deaf is a separate entity. I don't understand that if this law was enacted in 2016, where is any kind of adherence to that law? And Maryland School for the Deaf has been very retaliatory. I have filed 2 complaints against Maryland School for the Deaf back in 2016. And I've experienced retaliation. And they actually wouldn't let my sons get hearing tests there on campus or participate in after-school activities and social activities. I say all of that to say, now is the time for this to end. Maryland School for the Deaf, MSDE, and OAG corruption and their practices of placing blame elsewhere needs to stop. They need to be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Charlene Villalobos.
Hello. I just first wanted to thank you for hearing us today. I'm one of the champions of this process, and I've been reaching out to people in the newspaper and been leading a team of people. And have already submitted my testimony through video, so hopefully you've had the opportunity to see my testimony and hear about the experiences that I've had as a mother of an alumni from the Maryland School for the Deaf. Her name, Jacqueline Boys. And she suffered a lot from the years of 2008 to 2014, from elementary school to high school. There's a lot of suffering, and I suffered as well, which I've demonstrated. Also, we've got survivors and parents who've shared a lot. Now, they've not shared their stories because they're afraid. I too am afraid. And it's impossible to highlight everything that's happened because so much has happened. And so I've tried my best to narrow the scope and just to get to the point of what you need to know. And so my team has submitted many letters to the Board of Trustees and to the Superintendent James Tucker repeatedly without any kind of response. Finally, in September 28th or 29th, I got a response. Now, that response was not a response to all of the questions that we had submitted. The response just referred us to the Maryland School for the Deaf frequently asked questions page. What kind of response is that? That is not what we were asking for. We had a lot of questions. Another example is talking about the communication channels. They tend to be convoluted and unclear. There's no follow-up. There's a lot of finger blaming and getting sent in a lot of different directions that go to nowhere. And that's because the administrators are in control and they don't want anyone outside of the Maryland School for the Deaf to know what's going on, because they're afraid that it will open up a can of worms if the public were to know. And parents try to sit down and discuss their concerns with administrators, but every single time the administrators minimize it as if it's not something that is severe. And there's no follow-up or resolution to any of those concerns. And really, the core problem can be really kind of watered down to three factors. There's severe bullying, and not just run-of-the-mill type bullying that happens in any kind of school in the United States, but severe bullying, as well as favoritism. And I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by favoritism in just a moment, as well as elitism. And talking about elite families and how they get the best treatment, better treatment than non-elite families. And non-elite families meaning those that have children that are academically challenged, emotionally challenged, not athletes, or quote unquote struggle with life in general. And so I want to talk about LBE, which is the Life-Based Education Program. There's a building, which is the Vedditz building, which is across the street about, I would say, a quarter of a mile from the main campus for the Maryland School for the Deaf. And there's a high school there, a middle school, cafeteria, dorms, and some offices. So I just want you to understand that physical distance, a quarter of a mile between. So administrators like Kevin, Jennifer, Lori Viejo, Marcia Flowers, James Tucker, Melinda Padden, and then the list goes on. They look down on students that are BIPOC, or emotionally challenged, or academically challenged, or non-athletes, or have any kind of quote unquote behavior issues and are struggling. They dump them over at the Vedditz building. And that's true. I have witnessed it as a mother. I've seen it with my own two eyes. It's absolutely true. Do not tell me that it's not. So even though the teachers in the LBE program would occasionally recommend that the students didn't belong in that program because they may have a lot of potential educationally and they should be sent back to the main campus rather than be a part of that life-based education, the administrators tend to be very dismissive of those recommendations and never transfer the students back to the main campus. The LBE students are not well trained and they're not well prepared for the future of college or employment. They're just not. I also wanted to mention Lisa Smith, who is a Black social worker at the Maryland School for the Deaf. And her office is in the Vedditz building, which again is separate from the main campus. Finally, she got her office moved to the main building, which is the Eli building. And that's something that just happened in 2014. Now that conflicts with the law of separate but equal education, which was passed in 1954. And so, like I mentioned, there was a fourth of a mile difference. And why I keep emphasizing that physical difference is that if you have any kind of physical challenges, you have to walk to the main campus to go to the cafeteria, to go to offices, to any theatrical performances or any kind of activities. You physically have to walk. And that's not how it should be. I also wanted to emphasize that the Maryland School for the Deaf has two campuses. There's one in Frederick, Maryland, and one in Columbia, Maryland. And I'm sure you're probably aware of that. At Frederick, it's a mostly white elite family is the student body. Whereas in Columbia, there's a lot of BIPOC, as well as some academically struggling students. And so when students become high school age, because Columbia only goes through 8th grade, they then have to transfer to Frederick as they go into 9th grade to start high school. Often what happens when that transition comes is they continue to experience segregation. And I feel bad for those BIPOC students and how much segregation they experience. And they're not receiving a quality education. And they have been well raised prior to that, but now they're not experiencing that in Frederick once they start going there. And the BIPOC student bodies, generally there are a lot of white students, but I wanted to mention the BIPOC students. They generally are enrolled in a 5-year program, or they're held there on campus until their 21st birthday, whereas the white students are not. So when you look at Maryland School for the Deaf and look at their two campuses, you really need to understand that there are very few BIPOC staff members, very few, when you're looking at the statistics. For example, when you look at administrators, there's only one. There is one Black administrator out of both campuses in total, one. And BIPOCs often do not have the same opportunities as white students. BIPOC athletes are encouraged to play sports. Andy Boyeho, who is the athletic director, would encourage them to play sports, but wouldn't support them academically. And so they're not well prepared for the future. Whereas the white students get to be involved with a lot more opportunities. Also, I wanted to mention CTE, which is the technical education. It will never prepare them for college. It doesn't. The program does not. The career technical education program is not a viable option. The Maryland School for the Deaf invests all of its resources on the elite white students to make sure that they're college prepared, whereas the other students end up being oppressed. And there are not many teachers that actually are certified there at Maryland School for the Deaf. Very few of them are, because the teachers that are hired are all based on favoritism and who they know. This is the interpreter, or frozen. Not sure if she got disconnected or what happened. Oh, 1 second. All right, let's see where it got left off here. Okay, so as I was mentioning,
we have about 2 or 3 more minutes the most.
The favoritism and how they would hire their friends and people they knew, regardless of them having certification or not. And many staff and teachers were actually members of the Kappa Gamma fraternity. And a lot of them went to Gallaudet, and actually that's a fraternity from Gallaudet, and it was suspended 4 times. And so that's their go-to pool of people that they hire, is from the Kappa Gammas. And again, with the Board of Trustees, a lot of them are Kappa Gammas or the Phi Delts. And the superintendent Tucker, who recently retired, was a Kappa Gamma. And Kappa Gammas are well known for protecting and helping their own. And that's the favoritism and the elite students and families that I was mentioning of, is they tend to come from those two fraternities. And also, it's not just us that suffers, the parents and the students, but Maryland School for the Deaf's reputation has been tarnished across the whole country. Everybody is because of social media and everything else. Eyes are on Maryland School for the Deaf because of all of this. Also, Kevin's testimony that I read, I'm disappointed in what he had to say. And that's a good example of the chronic problems that persist at the Maryland School for the Deaf. And that's not okay. I could say a lot more, but time does not permit. And we just have no trust in Maryland School for the Deaf, OAG, or the Board of Trustees, because they're all colluding with one another. And Kevin, as the interim superintendent, has instilled a lot of fear in us. And luckily, COVID has actually happened because a lot of parents are feeling relieved that their kids can stay home and are learning online. And so they can actually get a break from the bullying. Can you imagine that they feel relieved by that? Because there's so much fear from the parents to send their kids physically to the Maryland School for the Deaf campus. They're afraid to testify as well because of it. So just think about that, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes that panel. And obviously, the group has brought up a lot of different issues and a lot of issues that were directly impacting them. Some of them I was surprised to hear, and I was a little caught off guard as we actually even began the hearing. I'm going to bring on the acting chairperson and the intern superintendent. I want to say in this transition that we did invite Maryland Department of Education, and they declined to attend today. I think the bottom line for us, in my opinion, as legislators, is to make sure that we do our very best to create the laws and fund the programs and do the things so that every student, no matter who they are, has a quality of education and an equal opportunity in life. And that's what we want to be focusing on. We want to be thinking about what is going on at this school and in any school to ensure that the kids get that opportunity. And if they're not in some way, shape, or form, we've got to figure it out. And that's why I agreed to have this hearing today, to hear from folks, and also to hear now from the school leadership about how they view this, what steps they've taken along the way, and what steps they may need to take, or we may need to help them take as we move on to the future. So I'll begin by inviting Stephen Leibach, who is the acting chairperson.
Hello,
Yeah, yes.
distinguished members of the committee and all the attendees at this meeting today. My name is Stephen Leibach. I am the acting chairperson of the Board of Trustees for 8 days. I started my position on October 1st. And first of all, I am a member and resident of the state of Maryland and have been so for 33 years. Specifically, I reside in Howard County, and I'm very familiar with both schools located in the Columbia area and the Frederick area. I became a board member 4 years ago, and I started to learn more about the school, and the school truly continues to thrive with some challenges as well. There are 19 members of the Board of Trustees, and they are all appointed by the governor's office. Since June 26th to present, we have hosted 10 meetings. Normally, we have 4 regular meetings annually, but this time we have had 10 meetings because we have received letters of concern that we need to recognize. We've had 5 executive committee meetings and 5 regular meetings of the Board of Trustees. To discuss various issues, and the 2 areas were personnel, that we cannot go further, and legal issues. The rest of the issues were held in public forum, and people were able to watch and participate in the meeting on our website. The purposes of those meetings were to do due diligence, to make sure that we were in compliance, to check with the MSD administration. And now I'd like to introduce our interim superintendent, who started on September the 4th, Kevin Strawn. Kevin?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Kevin,
Yes.
Great, great. I don't use my voice very often. I've been at Maryland School for the Deaf for 25 years. And almost all communication is through signs. So it feels very odd to be looking at people I know and speaking. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. I've been here at the school for 25 years, as I said, first as a teacher. Then I became the assistant principal for high school. Then I became the Frederick campus principal. And this year I'm serving as interim superintendent. I sent you a statement recently talking about the school, talking about my response to the kind of alarming things that were said in the Baltimore Sun, and also the work that we're doing to make MSD better. This is our 153rd year of existence. It's a really hard one. We're closed due to COVID. Our students are home on computers. Our families are quasi teachers now. So we're facing that challenge. We're facing the challenge of opening again, which is something we very much want to do and something that's scary to do. So we're also working on that. And this is making this whole situation right now is making this hard, especially a hard year for us. I know several of the people who just testified. I remember them. I remember working with them. I remember them as students and as parents. So it's tough to watch this. It's tough to hear this. I cannot speak to everything. I was a teacher for some of what was just said. I've been a principal. Most of my administrative time was principal at Frederick and not at Columbia. So there's some areas that I don't have direct information on. But there's some of that I do know. So it's hard to watch. A lot of it is also hard to understand. I simply, what is being described here is not the MSD that I know, is not the Maryland School for the Deaf that I know. I'm not saying that I haven't heard some of this before, but I'm telling you that this is not the school I know. I know us as a very strong school, as a model school. We have fantastic teachers and staff. They work very hard to raise and support students. I've been here for 25 years. Every year I watch seniors get on stage and graduate. We have students who enter the world confident and prepared. I see a school that does very good work. We are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I don't mean to imply that somehow the human condition doesn't touch Maryland School for the Deaf. Like every other place, we do have things that we're dealing with. But despite those imperfections, we have a very good school. It's run by very good people, and we have a very good staff. And if I didn't know that before, I certainly know it since COVID. Our people are doing heroic work right now. It hurts me to hear a lot of this, and it hurts to think that their work is being questioned. So it's just really hard to understand some of the things that have been shared here and that have been shared in the number of letters that have been sent from this group. Let me explain what I think is happening. Back in, I don't know the year, 2013, 2014, maybe 2015, there started to be a surge of social media, and we saw strange energy, and we saw strange anger from people in our community. Social media was new to us, and we also were seeing terms that we weren't familiar with. Intersectionality and trigger warning and safe space, unpacking bias. There was new things happening in our community. Much of this was probably coming from college campuses. Young families were bringing it. New employees were bringing it. It was becoming much of the language of social media and of much of our community. So we recognized that we needed to understand this better and to address it better. Then 3 years ago, we created a position called Coordinator of Equity and Inclusion. This is a person who came in and basically helped us understand this new way to us of seeing the world and understanding people's concerns. She provided a lot of training and leadership to leadership and faculty, to staff, full review of the curriculum. She became in many ways a teacher and a mentor to those of us at the school. How to unpack, how to talk, how to deal with concerns. Then 2 years ago, we created a position called the Ombudsman position. It was not really a position, but more duties assigned to somebody. And this was just another place that a person could go to seek guidance, to get help. If you weren't quite sure who to ask and you were not feeling safe, it was another way for people to be advised how to navigate school structures. So anyway, this was the work we were doing. And then we learned a lot. I learned a lot from this process. And then COVID hit. And then at the end of last year, or the end of last school year, George Floyd was killed at the end of May. And then in the weeks and months following, there was a lot of emotion. We had our own BIPOC, our own Black employees raise a number of concerns. They asked to meet, and we encouraged them to meet, and then they met with leadership. And like much of the world, like much of the country at that time, there was a sense of, hey, enough's enough. We need to move faster. We need to do better. There needs to be more Black teachers. There needs to be more Black people in leadership of the school. There needs to be more sensitivity training. And a look at policies. So at the same time, in those weeks following George Floyd's death, we had some families and community members writing letters to the Board of Trustees. And many took to social media and told their stories there. And then some called themselves survivors, and they were anonymous. I didn't know members of this group. I don't know who they are. They began a letter writing campaign, often full of just very serious, unsubstantiated claims, some of which were later printed in the Baltimore Sun. This group expressed extreme distrust in the entire school structure, with MSD's superintendent, with MSD's Board of Trustees. They didn't trust MSD's Alumni Association, the Governor's Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and as we heard a moment ago, the Attorney General's office. There was an extreme concern that there was corruption at all levels and that nobody was doing their work appropriately or ethically. I became superintendent September 4th, interim superintendent, and then I too was targeted. Both my work and my character have been maligned. At the time when all this energy was going on in June, we used MSD's social media platform to push out requests to share your story with us. Tell us if something went wrong. Tell us if there's something that we need to address. And instead of reporting to Superintendent Tucker or to me, who is principal, Kevin Strand. We pointed that toward our our coordinator of equity and inclusion. And as a safe place to go, please bring your story. A lot of these accusations have no time frame, no names, no sense of who did what when. And we can't investigate something that we don't understand the details of. There can be no due process or formality. So we asked for those stories to be told, and they were not shared with us. To this date, we don't know what many of these accusations really mean. That doesn't mean all of them. I don't know everything here, and I don't mean to say that everything is an untruth, but there's many accusations have been made that I'm not understanding. So in the midst of all this noise following the in the summer, last summer, MSD took following 4 actions. We created 6 work groups, each led by our staff, by our Black staff, who initially met and had asked for changes. This became 35 people working in 6 groups to focus on the areas of cultural sensitivity training, curriculum, human resources, family engagement, school environment, and student life. These groups worked hard for 2 weeks last summer with just 2 focuses: identify racism at MSD through stories, experiences, data, and policies, and to propose recommendations on how to change and improve those systems. Secondly, MSD created a wonderful Black Lives Matter section of our website that offers many excellent resources to students, to staff, and to families. It defines some terms. It talks about how we can all be allies to the Black community. I recommend that you look at it. It's got a wonderful documentary made by students several years ago regarding the education of Black deaf Marylanders from segregation to desegregation in 1957. Just a wonderful film. So it's a great resource. Thirdly, MSD's Board of Trustees is hiring an independent consultant to come into Maryland School for the Deaf and to identify what systems or procedures are in place that are counter to our commitment to equity and inclusion, and then to make recommended changes. And finally, we're hiring a chief diversity officer. This is a little bit a higher level person than the coordinator of equity and inclusion. This person will will sit on the superintendent's team at the highest level of the school, and will be responsible to continue to look at the school, to look at systems, to identify problems in the area of diversity that are within the Maryland School for the Deaf on both campuses. That will include academics, dormitories, after-school programs, including athletics, employment, just everything. That position will be in place to make sure that that Maryland School for the Deaf is loyal to this commitment to equity and inclusion. We're a school that's fully accredited. Every 7 years, we do have a very deep dive, a very head-to-toe kind of evaluation of our program. Our last accreditation was just 3 years ago. When we have that evaluation, all of our staff, all of our families, and all of our students, grades 4th through 12, are surveyed. They're asked many questions about the strengths and the shortcomings of Maryland School for the Deaf, and they have the right to speak up and share those thoughts there. At the evaluations that we got on these surveys that we got back and interviews that were done 3 years ago, we were told about concerns about equity, concerns about not enough Black teachers, not enough Black leaders. We did learn that. But some of the things that were in the Baltimore Sun, the reports that were in the Baltimore Sun of casually using racial slurs, locking children in rooms, draconian measures for discipline, none of these came up in our evaluation 3 years ago. Further, we had accreditation 7 years prior to that. Again, the entire community has an opportunity to share their feedback on the program. And that too has no evidence of some of the terrible things that are being said. When we just passed our accreditation 3 years ago, the Middle States Association Commissions on Elementary and Secondary Schools gave MSD its very highest rating, the highest level you can get for accreditation. It's called, we now follow the Sustaining Excellence Protocol. I also want to say Maryland School for the Deaf, is our title, and often the word deaf is focused because that's our unique population. But Maryland is also in our title, and we're very connected to the state of Maryland. MSD is completely compliant with the Maryland State Department of Education. We are, from how diplomas are earned, to instruction, to assessments, to IEPs, IFSPs, discipline, code of conduct. We run this school based on the wishes of the Maryland State Department of Education.
Can I ask you something about that, sir? So what is your routine interaction with them, and do they have some person or group of people assigned to the school, and how often is your interaction?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, our school collaborates mostly with Marcella. I'm not sure how to say her last name.
Yep.
Yeah, she's our main contact. We have representatives who attend all state meetings, assistant superintendent meetings. We are very much a part of all the meetings where expectations are cleared. We receive all mailings. We're connected to all emails. We are regularly audited by them. We are regularly providing reports to them to show that we are in compliance with MSDE.
Okay.
Okay. We're also fully compliant with Maryland Department of Health and the Department of Health and Human Services for, the Department of Human Services for the running of our dormitory program, our residence halls. And we're in full compliance with the Department of Budget and Management for all things HR and all things financial.
Could you, I'm sorry, again, just for the benefit of the committee, could you explain sort of the interaction? Obviously, having a board is a little unusual. Most schools don't have a board, but you are a state school. So talk to me about how that works. What power does the board have over the day-to-day or the overlook of the situation? Do they hire the superintendent? Do they do that in consultation with the state board? Explain sort of the relationship there.
Okay, I'll do my best. I believe that their primary duty is to hire and supervise the superintendent of the school, and then to oversee the work that the superintendent does. The Board of Trustees does not set policy for, it's anything counter to what the state would set. It might have some priorities that are unique to deafness that the state doesn't know about. So they oversee the superintendent. They oversee the work that the superintendent does, and they set some policies. So for example, there's things about ASL or other things. They check on reports often. The same kind of reports we send to the state, they will check on those numbers, kind of take the pulse of the community. Those meetings are done open to the public. Those meetings allow for people to come in and give testimony as well. So they listen to the community. And I think that's as much as I know right now.
Okay, so does the state, this is the one piece that I was curious about, does the state have any authority with the board or sign off in the appointing of the superintendent?
No, I don't. No, that's not the case. They do not. No.
They do not. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just about done here. I'll just wrap up
Great.
to say that in a month from now, we should have this independent consultant hired, and we'll be doing a full review of the school. In about 2 months or so, we should have a chief diversity officer on board and helping the leadership team and the entire school there. And then by late spring, early summer, we expect to have a new superintendent who will be leading us into the future. MSD is committed to serving our students and our families. our community, and our state. Um, I believe fully that we're honoring that commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Pinsky, I believe, has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strawn, you were obviously fell into a very difficult situation with your predecessor leaving fairly quickly. And I understand there were concerns and claims raised about inclusion and diversity and other issues beyond that. And it seems like you're taking some steps on inclusion, diversity, which I appreciate and respect. And I'm not one to judge whether many of these claims and allegations are true or not. Hopefully your research and your audit will show some of that. But I must say, a few minutes ago, you talked about the noise from the summer. And I think that's a little bit dismissive of calling it noise. So I would ask you to sort of think about that. And I understand people can make claims, and just because they make claims doesn't mean they're true. But I think reflecting on those concerns and allegations, non-issues from parents and former employees, even if a majority are shown not to be true, there's usually a grain of truth in a lot of things, as well as the issues of inclusion, diversity. We all have things to improve on and learn. I, for one, am in part of that group. I think all people who are of the white race have things to reflect on from the minority community. So I think you need to be careful of calling those things noise. I think that sort of reduces it. And I think we have to be a lot more careful if we want to send a message of an openness and transparency and inclusion. I think we have to give a little more respect than that. So just a comment from listening to it, and I'm not here to judge. There have been a lot of claims. I don't know if they're true or not. You know, I read the paper, you know, I believe no investigation, no right to speak. So if there's a thorough review and audit and it comes up with recommendations and some have proven true, then obviously we expect to act on it. And those that can't be proven and there's no evidence, then you have to move on. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. It's right. It's wise words. I did not intend to be dismissive. Thank you for that.
Can I ask you just to speak to this question, because this issue, I guess it has been referred to as elitism or differentiation or discrimination between so-called classes of deaf students, and how there may be perceived to receive different kind of treatment. I mean, you clearly have heard of this, and tell me if you believe that if this does or currently exists at the school, has existed at the school, and what steps specifically as it relates to that you may be taking.
Okay. Yeah, I want to be careful to not accept all the language that was said, but there is definitely dynamics that happen at the school. Some of them are probably related to the deaf community as much as it is related to Maryland School for the Deaf. I don't, you know, I had said that we're not, we can have the human condition just like anybody else. So there are people like in the Black community, some folks are not Black enough, or some folks are you know, it can happen in deaf community as well. I've seen it that those families that are strong deaf families with generations of deaf parents are proud. They are the, if you
I guess I can understand how that may happen in society. What I really am concerned about is that it doesn't happen from the leadership, and the leadership of the school doesn't treat anyone differently. That's the bottom line. We all know that life is not perfect and there's complications in the world, and all of that, and past stereotypes and behaviors. But the real question is, as a state institution, the state school, are the leaders and all of the employees in a position that they're not treating people differently because of any kind of discriminatory manner?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's been my experience that we are equal in that. I heard Ms. Griswold talking about her son and her experience and things that Mr. Tucker may have said to her some time ago. I was a teacher at the time. I taught her son. In my time in administration, I have not seen a push to support some kids and not support others. In fact, I would argue that as a school, what we're doing is those kids who have skills and who have privileges and who have families and are well off, we often are putting our energy toward the students that need more. So in my time in administration, I have not seen us as a school favor some kids over others.
Well, I certainly would hope not. And I
Right,
hope
right.
that as you move forward, clearly people think you have, some
Yes,
people
right.
have thinking. So as you move forward and I agree with Chairman Pinsky is, you know, I applaud the fact that you've taken some steps and with the diversity officer and such. I hope that those messages and the training that may be necessary, the classes that employees may need to take, whatever it takes, that at the end of the day, that's not a perception that exists. That would be my hope.
Indeed.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? All right. Then I have a list of some folks who are going to testify, citizens who are testifying. Pull that up.
I believe there are 4 witnesses, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Dr. Barbara Desmond is first.
Okay. thank
Senator,
you.
can you go to
Go
the
ahead.
next witness? She's having
Yes.
technical problems. We'll
Yes.
let you know when she's back.
Willie Flowers. I know Mr. Flowers was having some issues before, and he may have only been able to get onto the phone.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Mr. Flowers.
Hello, how are you? I can't, my video won't start. So, should I just read it?
Just
No.
do.
Your audio is fine. Just speak to us, to the committee. We're interested.
go.
There you go.
Actually, we have you now.
Thanks, sorry. Good afternoon, Chairman Gazon, Chairman Pinsky, and members of both committees. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Willie Flowers, and I'm president of the NAACP Maryland State Conference. We are a conference of 24 branches in the state of Maryland. More importantly, we have branches in Howard and Frederick counties where both campuses for the School of the Arts, our School of the Deaf, are located. First, I'd like to thank Senator Gazon for creating this opportunity for students and parents to speak. This has never happened for the School of the Deaf, and it shows that someone values them as residents of Maryland and students in our school system that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. It also shows that someone has concern about implicit bias in our state and support for survivors. As the branch president of Howard County NAACP, 2 years ago, I was contacted by a group of students who relayed to me that they had been victims of racial discrimination, disrespect, and constant bullying while they were students at the School of the Deaf. Because they had graduated from Howard County campus and were students at the high school in Frederick, I passed the issue along to the Frederick County NAACP branch. I regret that decision until this day. I regret it because I didn't take steps to do what we are doing today. The details students presented then were painful to even mention now, and the documented levels of disrespect and neglect by teachers and administrators should have never happened. And again, I'm ashamed that any child or student has had to experience such trauma and have it as a memory of their years in school in the state of Maryland, anywhere in the state of Maryland. I will not take time up by itemizing point by point the negative experiences. I will let the students express themselves. My job today is to remind everyone that the reason we are here is to put young people in the position to be successful and to explore their dreams. That is our job as educators. The only reason I'm here is to respond to the advocacy of students who place a lot of trust in the administration of the school for the deaf to protect and defend them, and it looks like that was not always done. The system failed them. As a reminder, the mission of the NAACP is to ensure the political, educational, social, economic equality of rights of all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. We are in the fight with these students until they feel protected and healed. Racial discrimination and disrespect should not be an experience that any child has in Maryland public schools. It should not be tolerated, and we can no longer be silent about it. I was sorry to read the testimony of Interim Superintendent Kevin Strawn. His testimony reads like a person who has never been racially discriminated against, nor has he spent time learning about the pain and trauma caused when children are hurt in such a way. What he does write is a defensive and almost defiant response to students' concerns and pretty much says that each of the students' negative experiences were mere allegations that cannot be justified. His words are painful even to me. I don't want to preempt his message, but he seems to address the system's response to what he calls non-specific and unsubstantiated allegations, but never once offers an apology to students who have been impacted by the systemic problems with the school for the deaf. To the students, I say to you, I'm sorry for not requesting this forum for a briefing before now. I'm sorry to any of you felt that you have not been valued for individuals that you are and will continue to grow to be. I'm proud of each and every one of you for advocating for yourselves and never giving up. You have shown courage and bravery by taking on a system that didn't seem to provide space for you from within. You took power into your own hands and expanded your message in the COVID summer, and I'm proud of each of you. To both committees, the challenges these students have faced cannot be corrected overnight. While I don't embrace the tone set by the current administrator and don't understand why, with all the reforms, the administrator left out any level of care and protocol for mental health for the impacted students. So maybe that means it's your job to draft and implement legislation or policies that will assist the students who have endured that trauma and anguish. It is certainly important to me as the president of the NAACP and a resident of Maryland to know that current and former students will be healed so memories will not haunt them moving forward. As a reminder, the Americans with Disabilities Act became law in 1990. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. The purpose of the law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. This is what is at stake. Are we going to be a state that upholds that law, or will we be remembered even more for not supporting our children? The NAACP Maryland State Conference will stand with the students and survivors of the School for the Deaf. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you. See any questions? So I'm going to move on to back to Dr. Desmond if she is on yet. Do we know? Kim?
Yes, she's by phone. We just unmuted her.
Okay.
Hello,
There we go.
this is Dr. Barbara Desmond. I'm the former education chair of the Maryland State NAACP. I concur with Mr. Flowers, our president. I must say that some of the information that I've obtained today I find disturbing and questionable. as far as practices in the MSDE, Maryland School for the Deaf, MSD. What it appears to me, and also the testimony that I've heard in the past, it appears to me, and the reason I have doubts, and I'm very curious about the cures or the remedies that have been suggested by the new superintendent, is that it seems that historically, the Maryland School for the Deaf has been operating on their own with little to no accountability to outside agencies, only to themselves. I looked at the response from the Maryland State Department of Education, which essentially says that they had very little domain or authority over the Maryland School for the Deaf, and I think that's questionable. In essence, that MSDE is responsible for compliance for that school as well as all the others in Maryland who are public institutions. Historically, I can only attest to what we have heard within the NAACP, and working, as you know, many of you might know, I've worked with equity issues with the State Department for many years. We've even helped write one of the bylaws on multiculturalism, on dealing with diversity, which right now is still in force in the state. What we have heard is historically that MSD has pardon me if I'm getting these, Maryland School for the Deaf has a reputation among educators, and I have been an educator for over 40 years and was assistant to the superintendent in Baltimore County, headed up the state task force under Elijah Cummings, et cetera, and Senator Dolores Kelly on diversity and seeing that all students were treated fairly. The information that came to us even up to 15, 20 years ago, that the Maryland School for the Deaf historically has a reputation for being resistant to disabilities or multiple disabilities, and that they're very ideological as far as viewing students as being deaf, but that associating that with culture, not necessarily with a disability, which it can be deafness, hearing loss under the American Disabilities Act. We understand that the Columbia campus, these are just to bring you up to date, over the years what we've heard, that they have taken some steps and that they have been a little more open to addressing multiple disabilities than the Frederick campus, that the campuses over the years have, although they've been a little bit reticent about it, or sometimes more reticent than at other times, that they had an agreement, albeit informal, and as I said, this is just the word on the street with the education agencies, with the Maryland School for the Blind, and that technically the Maryland School for the Blind sort of said, all right, we'll take the students with the multiple disabilities, and you can deal with the ones basically who have hearing loss. What happened a few years ago is more funding became available. This is what we have heard, and that the Maryland School for the Deaf with the Maryland School for the Blind agreed that the Maryland School for the Deaf would accept more students or look at handling or addressing multiple disabilities. I'm looking also, when you're saying that now we have both MSD and MNSB getting additional funding, and MSD says that it will commit to that. I think what we need, with all of the stories going around, the anecdotal information, the official and formal claims, we need now some independence, an independent evaluation and analysis. Not just something that's just answerable to the school, but we need a report that can be completed and also come to our respected senators, et cetera, and also later to be shared with the public and the parents and staff who have had these complaints. Climate surveys. We would have to look at these surveys, and we want them to see that they have been analyzed for their validity, for their reliability, et cetera. We also want to see that there are other information through observation, et cetera, that can be obtained by people going into the school and assessing the environment and using whatever other instrumentation in addition to observation might be necessary. I think right now to regain the trust of the community as a whole, and particularly the multiracial community, I think it is important that we have transparency and that we have evaluation. What the superintendent, with all due respect, what you have recommended, and I do support that myself, personally and professionally, is that you would have, you've taken some steps that are processive. You are going into a process, entering into some protocols for some remedies. What we need is an assessment of what results are going to occur, and we also need an analysis of your current, of the current status in that school at this time.
Thank you. No, thank you, Dr. Desmond. Appreciate that. Appreciate your
Thank
testimony.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, Elzenia Harcum. Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. No. Your mute is on right now, so you need to. There you go.
My name is Elzena Harcum, and I'm a parent. I have been involved with the MSD community. Hello? Yes, can you hear me?
We can. You may have some feedback. Are you listening to this on another source?
I'm using my laptop.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm a parent of a student who is now in the 10th grade. I've been involved with the MSD community since she was 9 months old, and I'm shocked at some of the things that I am hearing. I cannot speak to what's happening with the staff or the administration, but I have volunteered extensively at the Columbia campus, and I'm at the Frederick campus quite frequently. And I haven't really observed a lot of discrimination in that area. Now, I have worked for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Treasury Department as a senior level investigator. I've seen unfairness, but unfairness, as we all know, in and of itself is not discrimination. I'm going to speak more from the student's perspective. I do see that the children from Columbia are treated differently when they move into the Frederick community. That I do not attribute to race. I attribute it to the fact that Frederick is a strong deaf community. And the ones coming from Columbia, whether they are Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, they have trouble being fully assimilated into that culture. And I have spoken of this before, unless they are in sports. If they are in sports, they are all included. But the students from the Frederick area do not readily accept our children. We haven't been able to determine why that is so, but I do know individuals who transferred from the Columbia campus, an Asian, Caucasian, a few Asians, Caucasians, and they have come to the campus and they have transferred from Frederick. So we can't really say that it's because of the discrimination of the protected group, because we've had whites who are not a part of the, well, they are part of the protected group, but most of the time when we're talking about discrimination, we're not looking at whites, looking at Black, Hispanics, Asians. So there is something happening. And what I think it is our children don't feel fully accepted when they come into their campus by the students. Now, when discrimination has been raised concerning my child, because she has multiple disabilities and she has been teased, Once the school became aware of it, they took prompt and corrective actions. So she's not having that problem anymore. She didn't even want to go to school, but that didn't have anything to do with her being a Black student. It just did not. Something has to be done, and it probably has to start within the deaf community itself, so that when our children, most of our children in Columbia are coming from hearing families. So when our children come to that campus, regardless if they have hearing parents or not, they are still deaf. And we want our children, so the parents perhaps can talk to their students about embracing our children more when they come up there. I don't think that's anything that the school can do per se, except to reach out to the families that they know have children on our children's same grade level, and can explain to them, it doesn't matter if you're hard of hearing, it doesn't matter if you're deaf. When you get into the workforce, you're considered deaf. And I just love the education there. I have a daughter and a son who teach in public schools, senior teachers now. They've had deaf children in their classes, and they both have told me these children didn't learn anything because they weren't equipped to really help the children. The children didn't have interpreters. So the best place for our children to be is the school for the deaf. So I don't know what we need to do, but we have to do something to embrace all of our children, whether they come from hearing families, whatever. We have to embrace all of our deaf children. So that's basically why I wanted to speak. I'm very, very pleased with the education there. I know my child would not get the education that she's receiving there if she was in a public school or a private school, as a matter of fact, because she would have been in a private school, but for her deafness.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time. I know you waited around too. You were, I guess, expecting an earlier time to testify. We thank you for staying and sharing your thoughts. Senator Lamb has a question.
Yes.
And it sounds like this is a systemic issue that you're kind of citing too for students that come from the Columbia location and head over to the Frederick location. And you know, we've heard some concerns because I represent parts of Columbia as well. The school in the Columbia location is actually located in my district, and we've heard concerns from constituents that have moved over that you know, they don't feel that there's equity there when they make that move. I think the concerns that you bring forward are you know, obviously ones that mirror what we've been touching on earlier, and I think maybe this is to the board and the staff that you know, I think the concerns that have been brought forward are very serious. You know, I'm not sure that based on the responses that I've heard from the board member, from Mr. Leibach and Mrs. Strahan, if that's being taken to the level of seriousness that has been conveyed at the beginning. You know, it was shared with us a report from, you know, this education journal, Deaf V, you know, some pretty serious allegations in addition to what we've heard from the folks that testified earlier. And I'm just not getting a sense that this is being taken to the level of seriousness by the leadership of the school that really needs to reflect the concerns that have been brought forward. You know, and I think this is something that really needs a lot better oversight. And I'm not sure I have the confidence in the people that are at the school to be able to look at this independently, because there seems to be some systemic issues here, you know, whether it's the ones that Ms. Harcum brought up or others, you know, that testified earlier. These are very serious systemic problems that, you know, are ingrained in the culture of the school, it seems like. And, you know, without an independent look at what's going on here, I'm not confident that this will be solved.
Well, I was a systemic investigator as well, but one of the problems we have is the parents from this area, the Columbia area, they will not address their concerns. They won't come to the meetings. They won't come to the PTA. They will talk amongst themselves, but they will not get involved. And it's very similar on the Columbia campus too, because I have been a member of both PTA meetings. It's the same thing there. The parents will talk among themselves, but they will not bring their concerns forward. So if the parents don't bring their concerns forward, now I will bring mine forward, but if the parents don't bring their concerns forward individually or as a group, then how is the administration to know really what is happening amongst the students? There's a lot of unfairness, but unfairness is in the world. But parents have to be willing to speak up. If their children come home and say X, Y, and Z, they need to come and check and see if this is a valid concern. So the first thing I would say is to try to work with the parents, especially in your district. You say you're in Columbia, because that's where most of our younger children start who transfer to the Frederick campus. And rather than complain, they just move their children to the public school system. And for us who have deaf children or work with deaf children, we know that our children are not getting everything that they need to get in the public school.
Thank you very much. Last to testify is William Bowman.
It looks like, Mr. Chairman, there were a few folks that wanted to say something too. Is that?
Yeah, Senator Bailey, I believe, had the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And some of the other folks on the panel, it looks like, also had their hands.
No.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to take
Okay.
more comments from the panel, but we would certainly, if there are questions from senators, absolutely. Senator Bailey.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I have just a quick question for Dr. Desmond or Mr. Flowers. The
Yes.
thing that we have all learned, and I hope in the legislature we continue to learn about this, but in many schools, there's a culture that keep everything in-house because they have a fear of that negative connotation about their school. And I think that what we heard today was the parents advocating for their children and those concerns that they keep time after time not being addressed. And I feel that these situations are often swept the rug. I think there should be some type of oversight component. And I would like your thoughts on that when we talk about the administration and the superintendent and their accountability. And I think it needs to be from outside MSDE parameters.
I agree with you. And I think that after this hearing today, and certainly after a lot of the concerns about this discrimination practices are being dismissed by people who seem to be close to it, it certainly needs to be a third party to oversee any process to review the challenges in the school system from K until 12. I don't know if Dr. Desmond is on board, but she can share her experience already as a member of the Human Rights Commission dealing with certain issues that have come out of MSD. Is Dr. Desmond?
My other thought that I had is, being that you agree with that, well, something we talked about great length last year was an anonymous report by a parent, even a student, or even a teacher to an outside component such as the Center for School Safety. And I would just like your thought on that, because I think that's really what the Center for School Safety was set up and has the ability to do.
I agree with that step, and I think it'll be beneficial. It certainly would give, it seems like there's a consistent reality of retaliation with this school district, and that's very unfortunate. And I've met on 2 or 3 occasions with students, and they all have that feeling of retaliation. And so I think your idea is one that we can support.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to hear now from William Bowman. And again, I'm sorry, I know that a couple of the presenters might want to join back in and say some things. The way our procedures work is after you're given the opportunity to testify, if one of the members of the Senate would like to ask a question, they certainly can do, and that's sort of how the engagement on that level goes. But we certainly appreciate your original testimony. Mr. Bowman.
Hello, Chairman Guzon and committee members of the Budget and Tax Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come before you today and talk about the Maryland School for the Deaf. My name is William Bowman, and I graduated from the Maryland School for the Deaf in 1973. My family moved to Maryland from Pennsylvania so that my siblings and I were able to attend the Maryland School for the Deaf. My father, my uncle, my brother, my sister are all graduates of the Maryland School for the Deaf. I also have served on the board of trustees for the Maryland School for the Deaf for 8 years. I believe that was about 15 years ago at this time. Today I have decided to testify because I believe in MSD. MSD is more than just a school. It is a community as well. It's interwoven as a part of the culture. And a Maryland School for the Deaf is a big part of the community, and the community is a big part of the school. And it's like a home away from home to many. As far as what has been going on at Maryland School for the Deaf, it pains me to my core. And it is not good news at all. No good alumni or supporter of Maryland School for the Deaf would like to hear about this or see the article like the one that was published in the Baltimore Sun. And the Maryland School for the Deaf just celebrated its sesquicentennial anniversary just 3 years ago. And 150 years is a long time. And the success of the 150 years can be attributed to the wonderful collaboration that has existed between the state, the School for the Deaf, the parents, and the community as a whole. That is what makes up the members of the Maryland School for the Deaf community. And the program for the sesquicentennial has changed. It's really evolved over the years. But the overall mission has been basically consistent during all of that time, to be able to provide the best education possible to the deaf children. And again, I would like to emphasize that I acknowledge the pain that students and parents have had to endure. And I would like that experience to be corrected through changes and improvements to the system as a whole. And any program in any school system is an imperfect program. It's impossible to be perfect, but the Maryland School for the Deaf can make it better. The experiences that have happened with the teachers, we need to look at the measurement of the effectiveness of the program. Some people have brought up some oversight of the school, and that's one area that definitely needs to be improved and worked on. The Maryland School for the Deaf has some top-notch educational programs that are unparalleled elsewhere. And annually, the school's scholastic performance justifies that claim. When you go to Maryland School for the Deaf, every parent is unique, but hearing parents, of course, would want the best for their children to be educated. And I can say that there are 5 important parts that the Maryland School for the Deaf can offer. The first is intellectual growth. The second is emotional growth. The third is social growth. The fourth is after school activity opportunities. And the fifth, and probably the most important one, is the personal identification and development of your own identity. So those 5 core components have been a part of the Maryland School for the Deaf in its 150-year tenure. I'd like to talk about the elitism in just a moment. The Maryland School for the Deaf I've seen other schools for the deaf, and I do feel like Maryland School for the Deaf does represent the fabric of the state, and not just the state, but the country as well. They are contributors, and they're contributing members of society in many different ways. And alumni represent the Maryland School for the Deaf well. And so Maryland School for the Deaf has done well until recently. The recent events serve as a reminder that every student counts. No one student is less important than another. Every student is important, and every student is different. The school must embrace the diversity, and the school will, or the school must, make some changes that will ensure that it will be able to endure another 150 years. The Maryland School for the Deaf is very fortunate to have its Board of Trustees, and that is a unique structure compared to other programs that may exist within the state of Maryland or even around the country. The board has been in existence for the 150 years to oversee the School for the Deaf, but leaves the daily operations to the superintendent to handle. And the composition of the Board of Trustees are those that are considered to be experts on the issue of deafness, so that they can help make sure that Maryland School for the Deaf is the most appropriate that it can be. I also wanted to talk a little bit about elitism, because I think that is a very hot topic today and probably one of the most sensitive parts, especially with parents.
And Mr. Bowen, we could ask you to maybe that be the last point that you could wrap up on.
So there were 2 hearing children that I sent to Catholic school that graduated, and I saw elitism. And then later, through my own personal experiences and life experiences, I realized that elitism is just human factors. That is what happens, and it's part of everyday life. I even see that in my workplace, and public schools, private schools, and now at the Maryland School for the Deaf. So it's not something that is unusual or unique to the Maryland School for the Deaf. It is very commonplace in many different places. I think that it's more about how the Maryland School for the Deaf handles it and responds to it more so than anything else. And I think that's very similar to the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's like trying to get into a fire and trying to control it. And so I know it's a very sensitive topic, and I hope that the Maryland School for the Deaf will work on it. It's a great school, but there is always room for some improvement and for some changes to be made to the system so that it can be good for everyone. And I just wanted to respond to one of you who had made a comment about not accepting students who have multiple disabilities. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to just clarify that point, that when I was serving on the board several years ago, and that you are right, Maryland School for the Deaf does not accept everyone that has multiple disabilities. Maryland School for the Deaf does not have the resources in place nor the funding to be able to educate students who have multiple disabilities. And I can't imagine that if the Maryland School for the Deaf or any school, if they didn't have the resources and they still allowed the students to come to that school with those multiple disabilities, and then would not be able to actually adequately able to educate them. And so that is one of the reasons why Maryland School for the Deaf does not accept students who have multiple disabilities. It's due to resources and funding. And I don't think the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Senator Ellis has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the witnesses. This hearing is very informative. And I heard something said earlier, and I apologize. I had technical difficulties going in and out. And so if this was covered earlier, please forgive me. But I heard someone said of the two campuses for the School of the Deaf, one in Columbia and the other in main campus in Frederick, that the campus in Columbia, which teaches mainly minority students, it has a really inferior academic standards, and they really do not prepare the students after they have to go to high school in Frederick, that the students are not prepared to really do well there because of whatever you might want to call it, elitism or racism or one of the isms. I'm really concerned about that. And I don't think that was, I didn't hear anyone address it, the acting superintendent or the current board member. So could either the board member or the superintendent, Mr. Strahan, address that issue as far as the systematic difference in quality of education at the two campuses?
Go ahead, Mr. Strahan.
I have a team of people here to help me out. As interim superintendent, I don't know a lot. I'm at Frederick campus for a long, long time, but I've not worked a single day at Columbia until this new role. So maybe somebody either, I've got two people, either Daniela, who is the current principal, or Jen Ortiz, who is the former principal of Columbia, could speak to that. Perhaps Jen, actually. Jen now works at Frederick, so she has a better view on the difference between Columbia and Frederick. So let's try to get Jennifer Ortiz into the room.
Can you all see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. As was just mentioned, the Columbia campus, we cover birth to 8th grade. Frederick Columbia's birth to 9th grade, birth to high school. We also have two curriculum teams who work together when we develop curriculum, lessons, the lesson plans, the training, the professional development, so forth and so on. That is done collaboratively between the Columbia and the Frederick campuses. Weekly meetings are held where both principals meet from each of the campuses to make sure that we are aligned with everything. Now, for each class, grade, each individual, their IEPs, their accommodation needs, of course, we fit that to the individual student. Now, Columbia campus, as just was mentioned, we have more families who have deaf children and they are hearing. Those families may not be signing at home with their students. So it means that we have to provide additional language opportunities and language access to those students. Now, Frederick campus, we tend to have a lot more deaf students with deaf parents who have language at home. The protocol, the procedures, we work together, the testing, the assessments, all are exactly the same, but we work to meet each child, each student's individual's needs. that may be different. Is somebody else want to add to this? The principal of the Columbia campus?
So I have a quick question
Ella
before you
Patterson?
since I have you, if you don't mind, please. So each student at the School for the Deaf, do they have an individual education program, IEP, each one? Or is just reserved for certain deaf
Yes,
students?
they do. Yes, 100% of our students have IEPs. Each of our students have IEPs.
Right.
We are a 100% IEP school.
Okay, thank you.
And if they're under 3 years old, they have an IFSP, which is an individualized family service plan. Then they move on to an IFSP when IEP when they are 3 years and older.
Okay, so if each student have an IEP, individualized education plan, it would take into account their family situation and would make adjustments whether that child came from a family who have deaf issues or not. So why would there be a difference in the educational process for these students, whether they have parents at home who can support them versus not?
I'm sorry, but I need clarification on, you're saying different education processes. The processes are exactly the same. The admissions is the same. There's one team for both campuses. So I'm trying to clarify what it is that you mean by different processes.
Well, I thought I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I heard that if certain students have too many disabilities, then the school look down on accepting that student. Or if they accept some and some additional issues develop, you might not be equipped to handle those students, and therefore they might fall through the cracks.
Okay, so we have an admissions criteria, and we can meet most of the students' needs and their additional disabilities. The only time that we may sometime, and this doesn't happen oftentimes, we don't accept the student is supposing they will not benefit from a visual learning environment, or if they need more than what the school can offer. That's why they would be denied. But we do accept students with additional disabilities. We have all kinds of services out there that are available. Some of them have one-on-one aids. Some of them have multiple programs to support their academic growth. No, we accept many students with additional disabilities. We have variations, like we have essential life skills classrooms for students who have autism. We have other classes that have additional supports. We have one-on-one aids. Many of them are mainstreamed into the regular classroom. We customize our educational program for each individual child to ensure that they thrive in their learning style.
Well, thank you. I won't take up any more time, but there's a little disconnect with what I heard before what you just said. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions from senators. And that concludes the list from today. Chairman Pinsky, did you have any last comments?
No, I just want to thank you for taking the lead on this, Chairman Gazzoni. I think we all believe in transparency, and if there are challenges or conflicts, we need to open them to the fresh air and the sunlight. And I think we're starting to do that, and hopefully there'll be some reflection and more follow-up because of this. So thank you for your efforts.
And thank you for being part of this and your committee, and thanks to the Budget and Tax Committee. Thank you to everyone who testified. I appreciate all of that. I mean, this is my simple message as a walk away is a commitment to keep following up on this. I really think we need, and I'm going to ask staff to delve into the laws in terms of what levels of responsibility of the board, at the school, of the superintendent, of MSDE. I think, as has been mentioned a couple times, an independent look into this to me seems to be in order. We're going to have to go through all that and see what legal authority we have, and if we have to change any laws to provide for that, we'll certainly have those discussions. There's clearly something here. I mean, there's a disjoint, as Senator Ellis just said a minute ago, that just doesn't seem acceptable to me. We've got to figure out what we can do, and at the end of the day, as has been said many times, every child deserves the best, and we're going to do our very best as the policymakers and the people who have to deal with the budgets to provide the resources and the policy so that everyone has an equal chance to live their best lives. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your participation. Thank you to the staff also. They were terrific. It's been challenging along the way, and to the interpreters, we're very grateful for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.